I would now like to welcome to the stage Stefan Teasdale and his panel. Now we've talked about concepts and we've talked about a brand, and what these guys are now going to talk about is designing for scalability. So when you create your concept with the idea of then making it scalable, how do you do that? Not just from a design perspective, but from a business model as well and an operational perspective. So Stefan, please join us, and the panel, if you want to come up here as well. Thank you so much. Welcome.
Thank you, Jennifer. Well, we're running a little late, so we're going to get right into it. I'd like you to welcome our very distinguished guests this afternoon. First, right in front of us, Sarah Jane Grant, who is director at LXA. Andrew Morrow, on the far right, on your far right, who is general manager, food and beverage development and operations at Roya International. Danny Billington, who is the operation manager at RMAL Hospitality, and finally, last but not least, John Bentley, who's the director of Middle East for Harrison's. So our topic is design for scalability, and really what we'd like to talk about this afternoon is how to translate a brand in different markets in a seamless way. So why don't we just dive into it right now? Perhaps I could throw it out to you first, Andrew. And maybe ask you just to start is what constitutes, in your opinion, the DNA of a concept? What are the key features that makes a concept something that you want to think about replicating? And we'll talk afterwards about how we do that.
The DNA of a concept really is like the DNA of a person. Every single brand, every single restaurant, every single concept has a different DNA. And it's very much up to the founders of that brand to identify their own DNA. If you're a fast casual brand, it might be your logo and visual branding. If you are a casual dining restaurant, it might be one of your key products and your service. If you're a fine dining restaurant, it might be the uniqueness of your cuisine, whether it's a fusion or whether it's a singular, or like Noma, it's reinvigorating ancient cuisines. So the DNA really is up to the person. What's important is to stamp that DNA on your brand and make sure that what you are identifying as your DNA is spoken out to the world at large.
So could we say that, for example, some of the three key features of a brand could be something like image, for example, such as branding, the logo, the name, and possibly the execution of the concept, the delivery of the service,
of course.
And possibly as well the product, whether food or service. In our case, we're talking about food at this conference. So,
well, food is, we had a bit of a conversation on this earlier. Is food the main reason for going to a restaurant? Well, yes and no. I mean, you obviously go to a restaurant to eat, but is it the one and only draw card? And again, that is up to the brand. Some brands have very sparse, naked interiors, and they want all of the focus to be on the food. Others have very loud and extreme interiors and brand concept, and the food becomes an accessory to the overall experience.
I think the difficulty is how do you engage with your customer, and at what point do you want to familiarize yourself with your customer? So your customer's coming into your venue, do you want them instantly to know that this is your brand, or do you want your brand to be communicated in a much more subtle way? And like you say, that can be done on many different ways. It can be your welcome experience, it can be the food itself that is your main pull. You know, I'm having the same burger in the same named restaurant, and that's replicated. It might be something else. I mean, if you look at Lexus, for example, Intersect by Lexus, you know, the food isn't the same. What's delivered in Japan is not delivered in Dubai in terms of food concept. But you will walk into the space and you will see the touch points that tell you that you're in a Lexus-inspired environment. So it doesn't have to just be the food, it doesn't have to just be the offering, and what you have to really define is what your USP is going to be and how that translates into your environment.
No, I agree. I think that the DNA really is the brand identifiers that you know, I think we touched on it earlier on. It's the backstory. It's definitely environment. There's maybe the start of service. It's of course the product. I think the DNA changes for your different type of concept. You know, it could be a wet led, or it could be late night lounge. It could be food led. I think it also varies in terms of where you are within the market. Is it high end? Is it mid range? Is it casual? And I think it's how you connect with your customers. You know, at the end of the day, I mean, that's the real focus here. So I think, you know, certainly looking at it in terms of scalability, you know, it's really just important to identify that DNA and identify everything about it and see which elements then you need to focus on to refresh.
If I could just chip in, there's certain elements which actually can be localised. We've heard a lot about that today, haven't we?
Yeah.
In terms of actually understanding that, you know, you can deliver one concept in one area of a town, so say Dubai, and then just a few miles down the road you need to kind of evolve it to suit another immediate market. So the DNA though actually remains
the same.
So I guess the bottom.
You know, we have to fill around with the kind of the bits around the edges, if that makes sense.
So you're specialists in the area. So how do you go about that? Does it have to do with demographics? Does it have to do with
If I just express one example that we dealt with in Harrison's in the last couple of years, and that was when we developed the Greek concepts down at JBR on the beach. And we had the design sessions with Food Fund International. They were good sessions, and we kind of just placed ourselves in that immediate locality. Obviously, the restaurant's literally 20 yards away from the actual beach itself, and we envisaged the kind of the dudes coming in from the beach and stuff, kind of a little bit sweaty, you know, they've been on the beach all day, dusting themselves down from the sand and stuff. So we pitched that particular environment, which is what we deal with. So it kind of allowed for that kind of person to be attracted to it and be comfortable in that environment. So we created this kind of rough diamond approach. We stripped it right back. We then fast-tracked, say, 18 months from that point, and we delivered the second one of the Morrow efforts. The DNA exists between the two sites. You know, it's still an Eat Greek, but we actually dialed up the theme in the Morrow because it's a much more shouty and vibrant environment.
No, I agree. I mean, I was going to say it's dependent on the location. You know, is it community? Is it more of an iconic kind of site? Is it you know, it varies. Yeah, of course. And the demographic.
I was going to say demographic being key. I mean, if you think about Wagamama, which Dani and we worked on, one of the bringing Wagamamas to the Middle East was one of the points we had to consider was dwell time. So in the UK, Wagamama is a much faster, isn't it?
Yes,
it's much faster concept. So you come in, you eat, and then you get out. And I think we worked it out at being between 20 and 30 minutes for somebody to come in and have lunch and then get out again. In the Middle East, it's much longer. Well, not much longer. It's around about 45.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, it's definitely longer.
It's longer. And so what we had to consider is the comfort of the clients and the customers sitting in the harder seats. So we had, you know, the original concept was very hard seats, wasn't it? So we had to consider actually comfort. So do we put arms on our seats? But that's not the brand. Do we put maybe some comfortable cushioning to make that experience a little bit more comfortable? So it's all these little points that you have to think about. What changes when you move?
Or what stays the same.
On what stays the same, exactly.
And I think, you know, in terms of a concept such as Wagamama, let's say, it's fairly old now. So what do you do? What do you refresh? What do you update in terms of keeping it relevant? Because that's what it's about. Whatever you're doing in terms of design now, and even looking at it regionally, globally, you're looking 2 years down the line. You're not looking for now, really, because if it's now, then it's already gone past you. So I think you always have to bear that in mind. I know for Wagamama, we had to really almost look at realigning it, repositioning it, because I think you're just thinking, okay, where does it fit into that market? And how does it connect with the market? And I think you're quite right in terms of demographic. You know, I think we had a discussion this morning where, for me, I think you've got to have the demographic correct and
First.
fit Wagamama into that demographic and that location. That location.
We did talk about this, and it's a good question to ask yourself. When you are looking to expand, when you are looking to grow into new markets, do you look at adapting your brand for that market, or do you look within that market for a similar demographic to what you have succeeded in other cities? For example, if you're in the CBD of New York or London, do you look, when you look to come to Dubai, are you looking in a mall location, which has no relevance at all to a CBD location in a foreign city? Or do you look to BIFC or another central business hub within the region? Or do you say, no, we're going to stick to the malls, that's where the footfall is, and we're going to adapt our brand to suit that environment, which means pretty much making a major adaptation to your brand, which goes back to the DNA. As long as your DNA is there, when people walk through the doors, they say, I know I'm in this brand, whatever that brand may be. But going back to you, John, you said that it was a really interesting thing. You have a location on the beach, you have an amazing view, you've got the beach 50 feet away, and then you took a location in the mall. You said that the DNA is there. So what were the 3 or 4 factors, if there were 3 or 4, that you copied in order to make sure that when people walked into either location, they could immediately identify it as an E3?
I think we've already mentioned, it's some mixture, isn't it, of course?
Yeah.
Type of service, it's kind of the greeting that you might get from the waiters and so on. Obviously the food as well is the big thing which has to be pretty much consistent when you move around cities or regions and so on. In terms of what I do, I suppose it's just when we just consider the tangibles of this. What will the guests see? What would they expect to see? For the Greek concept, again, just to go back on that as an example, it's just about capturing the essence of what Greek might be, but in a non-contrived sort of way. We did dial up the theme a little bit in the Mall of the Emirates for good reason.
Yeah.
For the reasons why I've explained. But it's just maybe just capturing the essence and the tactile nature of, say, Greece as a whole. If that's possible, of course it isn't, but we think we've all got an idea of where that lies, and just dealing with it in a kind of semi-abstract sort of way, and delivering the interior concept in that way.
Yeah, I suppose.
We worked on Leopold, didn't we?
Yeah.
A couple of years back, and that had quite an interesting kit of parts. You pretty much it's almost a circle of different concepts pulled together.
Exactly.
But it was very much focused, wasn't it, on the different pieces of theatre, and not necessarily. So if you went into Leopold's in Abu Dhabi, for example, and then you look at the one you had on the beach, and JBR, very different feels, but mainly because of the environment, not necessarily the brand itself.
Exactly. Well, developing Leopold's, when we took on that, well, it didn't take it on, we developed it from the ground up, my 2 business partners and I. We started off with looking at doing an upmarket Starbucks, so to speak, something a little bit more creative and boutique. What we ended up with was a 750 square metre monster that included a huge menu, a tea library, and a barista bar. But it was when we opened the second one that we actually identified our brand icons, which had nothing to do with the food, funnily enough. From a furniture perspective, it was the tables and chairs. They had to be the one interior design feature that went throughout all locations, and that was the black bentwood chair and the marble top table. And from an operation point of view, we had to have a barista bar and we had to have a tea library. Everything else was adjustable. The menu could be adjusted, the overall interior design could be adjusted, how we displayed our retail items could be adjusted, flooring, all of that could be adjusted. As long as we had our tables and chairs, our tea library and barista bar, that was enough for us to feel that any guest walking into any of our locations would say this is a Leopold.
I think what's really interesting as well is when you have to scale back your concept. So what a lot of our clients are asking us to do at the moment is thinking about much more, you might have a fine dining offer, but how do we make that a little bit fresher? We're looking at trucks, we're looking at street food, we're looking at how to bring that. Is it a case of limiting the menu? Do you have a smaller kitchen? Is it a case of maybe do you offer a takeaway option? So actually what's a real challenge is to think about how you've got your amazing brand that you've put your heart and soul in, but what goes and what stays to make it a smaller concept. Maybe you've got a smaller space.
Yeah. I was going to say that I agree with that in terms of, we've heard it today that a lot of fine dining chefs are now starting to, enter the mid-market and I suppose tying into that point of scaling it back. We see the same with our Marco Pierre White brand.
Yeah.
There's an iconic chef, but very old school almost, but really defined the scene, 30 years ago. Maybe the need has changed. Certainly, if you try and put a concept like that to the millennials of today, maybe they don't really understand it or buy into it so much. So certainly for us, I know we've been looking at a project for Abu Dhabi with Marco Pierre White, and that will be definitely part of the scope of work, so that it has to be really scaled back and repositioned completely.
I mean, Marco Pierre White's quite a big personality in our industry, and he comes with a certain DNA, sensibilities,
his own DNA.
Kudos. And trying to make that sort of fresh and modern, and thinking about how that translates for what people want to see today. But Marco Pierre White's completely about quality. So I think what we'll certainly celebrate when we do define this, it will be quality, but in a really modern and fresh way.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost ironic. It always amuses me that we took on a MPW grill, which is one of the portfolio. And I remember looking at his first USPs or taglines or words that were connected to the brand, and the one that really struck me, which was, that really fitted, was uncompromising.
Yeah.
I was very much like, and I think the second word was bold. And I just thought, okay, I've got my hands full now, yeah.
It kind of defines who buys the market, I think, actually. That's quite good words there. Just that idea of having to scale back, and yet we're talking about scalability. It's almost like a paradox that we're dealing with here. We found that, although we've not delivered the TGI Fridays in the Middle East, we did a lot of work in the UK in repositioning that brand, and that led to our US office as well, where we work with the team out there. And a lot of the work was based around how the bar influences the restaurant as a whole, and re-engaging the two, if you like, ensuring that instead of having a restaurant with a bar, it became a bar restaurant.
Yeah.
Right.
So you could go there first and meet your friends and all the rest of it, as it was back in the 60s and 70s in New York. Our challenge, ultimately, if we end up doing one in the Middle East, is what happens in this region where you're not really meant to do a bar sensitivity. So how do we actually deal with scalability on a global perspective is one of our huge challenges that we've got. I don't know what the answer is yet, because we've not started that journey yet, but actually it's quite interesting how scalability exists on different levels, I suppose. On a global perspective, it's a whole different thing.
I think it goes back, doesn't it? It goes back to what you're trying to achieve. What do you want your customer to feel? What's the human interaction within the space?
What's the purpose?
What's the purpose?
What did the customer gain from the bar activity in the States and in the UK and etc.?
Exactly.
How do you replace that energy hub to a market where...
So how do you, if you have a piece of advice for some of the people in the audience, is if they want to sort of do a little bit of introspection and find out, how they can define those key elements of their brand, and how, what they're going to think about when they talk, they think about scalability and when they adapt in different situations or different markets. So if you, each of you have one little piece of advice, what would that be?
For me, it's very simple. Number one has to be know your customers. Talk to your customers, engage with them, understand them, and relate to them, but, of course, listen.
I'd agree.
That's mine. No,
Sorry.
it does all come down to your customers. The reason, if we go back to Leopold's as an example, the reason we chose our tea library as one of our icons is because of how many people actually Facebook and Instagram our tea setup and how we actually served our tea. And we realised that people would come to Leopold's for Thursday, Friday, Saturday breakfast first, and that was their first introduction to the brand. But aside from the good food, what they really came back for was the experience, the service experience and the tea experience. And it was really that feedback that we got listening to our guests that defined what our icons were. So again,
yeah, certainly. And I think the only thing that I would add to that really is, for me, once you understand your guests and you understand your DNA and you've created your brand and you've put it all together, the major thing for me is just make sure that everybody buys into it. All of your team, all of your staff, all the way to the top, they all fully live it, breathe it, and deliver it, because they're your biggest ambassadors in terms of selling that and really, the vehicle to make it very, very successful.
I agree with that point, very much so. It was actually what I was going to say as well. You need to make sure that you spend the time to ensure that your partners, whether it's your investor, whether it's your consultancy team, and more importantly, your customer, everyone's got to engage on whatever it is that you're trying to communicate. But just to add to that point very quickly, obviously you need to understand what's going to drive your profitability, because that relates in that, bottom up. So if your customer's price point, you've got to consider how much you're going to spend on your interior, how you're going to use your material, and where your material is going to come from. So absolutely understand when you move your concept, what's going to drive your profitability.
All right. Well, fortunately, our time is up. Unless you want to add one last word.
You said everything perfectly well.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to thank all four of you. Thank you very much. Ask the audience to give them a round of applause. Thank you all for being here this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was great. Really appreciate that. I feel like we've been on a whole journey today. I'm ready to open my own restaurant now.